Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us for the learning of Torah's Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. As always, we begin first giving Hakaras HaTov to TorahAnytime.com that gives us a platform to teach Torah all over the world. Also to Kol HaLashon for its global reach, and to Torah Communications Network, to those that are watching on YouTube, on Facebook, subscribers, Zoomers, and those of you here in our flagship station at the Agudas Yisroel Beis Zev of Fairways, Lakewood. This week, we lay in Parshas Parah. And in honor of Parshas Parah and the opening of the Pesach season, we have two special sponsors. My dear Talmud, for many years, sponsor of our Mishnah Yomis, dedicator of some of my Svarim, Mr. and Mrs. Rabbi and Mrs. Yoel Klugman, sponsoring the shiur that there should be a Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. Very worthy tefillah, especially now where there's such ferocious attacks from the Hezbollah, Yamach Shemam B'Zichram. We're also sponsored by another dear Talmud of mine, Aryeh, who is sponsoring it with the tefillah that there should be a Zivik Hagain for Tzvi Moshe ben Davida Mekarev, and also in honor of the Mesivta of Cincinnati. They should continue to produce Talmidei Chachamim, and the Hanhola of the yeshiva should have continued Atzlacha in their Avodas HaKodesh. Parshas Parah, the Beis Yosef says that it's Doraisa. Although the preponderance of opinions in Psak is it's only D'Rabbanan, but because of this, when our Gabbai Chaim Rosen asked me which Sefer Torah we should use, I said we should use his Sefer Torah, the computer-checked Sefer for Parshas Parah, and the other Sefer for the rest of the laning, since there is an opinion that, like Parshas Zachar, Parshas Parah is biblical in nature. It's interesting, this Beis Yosef, which is in Siman Tov Reish Pei Hey, I found it fascinating that if you look at Tov Reish Pei Hey, it contains in it the word Parah. Right? Reish Pei Hey is the word Parah. There's no coincidences in these things. Indeed, in many shuls, the Gabbai gets up. We know Rashi tells us that the Parah Aduma, the red cow, was brought to be mechaper for the sin of the Egel Azav. It's a cow, and it's it comes to atone for the sin of the Egel Azav. Now we know that we have Sheish Zechiros, 6 things that we're supposed to remember all the time. One of them we announced last week, that we have to remember to eliminate Amalek. Another one of the 6 Zechiros, some people say it at the end of davening every morning, is Zachar al Tishkach. Remember, don't forget. See that double lashon. Remember, don't forget. When you use that That's how important it is. L'char al tishkach eis asher hiksavto es Hashem alikecha b'midbar. How you angered Hashem in the desert. He just gave us the Torah. The second commandment was that we shouldn't worship idolatry, and then we go and make a golden calf. So, when we learn Parshas Parah, which is to atone for the sin of the golden calf, the red cow is to atone. So there are those that give a clap before they lane, that you should have a mind to be yaitzi with the one who makes the bracha on Parshas Parah, which we say by the maftir from Parshas Chukas, and we say that we should remember this obligation not to forget the sin of the Egel Azav. The Sfas Emes, says, and he points out that Adar, this is the end of Adar, all the way at the end of the month of Adar. Adar is the last month of the year. Just like Nisan is the first of the months, right? I told you, that's why we don't date our check. You know, in January we don't date it 1, because that's counting from January. We count from Nisan. So you write January, you don't write the number 1. It's a mitzvah. So Adar is the last month. So the Sfas Emes says that just like in the last month of the year, Elul is a time to do tshuva, so also Adar is the last month of the months. It's also a time for your purification. And we know that the Parah Adumah is all about purification. The simple reason why we learn Parshas Parah is because we know that somebody that was a Tamei Meis, somebody that had corpse contamination, was not allowed to enter into the Beis HaMikdash. That's an Issa Koris. And was not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, not allowed to eat Kachim, until he's cleansed from his corpse contamination. And the only way to be cleansed from corpse contamination, it's not enough to go to the mikveh. You have to be sprinkled with the water mixed with the ash of the Parah Adumah on the 3rd and the 7th day. You have to be sprinkled twice. So therefore we learn it, and we know the Abol L'Tayr Messiah Noisai, that one who comes to purify, Hashem helps him. Now, we dip in, when we shech the Parah Adumah, we dip into the blood 3 ingredients. It's a very unusual procedure. We dip in cedar wood, 8 zeres, aziv, hyssop, ushni solas, and a scarlet thread. Now what's that all about? So Rashi tells us, this is a homiletic Rashi, explaining the ritual. Rashi tells us that the mightiest tree is the cedar tree. So Rashi says, Mishin is good. If somebody became arrogant and sinned, so he should be yashpil atzmai, he should lower himself like an aziv, like the lowly hyssop bush, visolas, and he consider himself lowly as a worm, and then yiskaper. The remembrance of the Meiser Egel is the Parah Adumah. The Balaturim, of course, gives us his wonderful gematria power. Parah Adumah is exactly, by the way, it's spelled Aleph Daled Vav Mem Hey. Para Aduma is exactly Bigematria 341. And Zeh Al Avon Egel, this which is brought for the sin of the calf, is also 341. So we have to understand that there's a tremendous lesson over here. That it's possible for someone to be at such an elevated level that they saw the Rebbeinu Shalom on Har Sinai. They were crowned with 2 crowns, it says in the Gemara. They wore 2 crowns. One for Naseh and one for Nishma. They reached such a remarkable level. And to plunge right afterwards in the abyss, in the cesspool of the sin of the Egel Azav. So of course, this strikes the heart that never be confident in yourself. Al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom ma'ischa. This mission of purification is a very good preface. It's a very good preface for the season when we go to clean Chometz. Because what's Chometz? We all know what Chometz represents. The Gemara says that Chometz zu sa'ir shebe'isa. That's the sourdough of the dough, the yeast of the dough. And just like the yeast agitates the dough, so the Yetzer Hara agitates us. When a person is an Erev Shabbos, and the Yetzer Hara gets us agitated. The Yetzer Hara gets a person agitated to yell at his friend. The Yetzer Hara gets a person agitated to follow things that take him away from the pursuits of life. That's all the Yetzer Hara. So this season of purity that we usher in with the Parshas Parah is getting us ready for our pursuit of the Chometz. Now you have to know that there's no way that a person is going to seek out their flaws if they're full of themselves. One who has a goy v'alev, one who is full of his success and qualities, is not going to seek out his imperfections. The hakdama of Parshas Parah, where a person remembers that he should consider himself like a lowly hyssop, like a worm, gets him ready to be able to look at his imperfections. And this is the simple reason, the simple meaning of a very, very fundamental pasuk. I want to say this in preface to this shir, that this shir is not for the faint-hearted. This shir is not an easy subject. I should give a waiver that somebody that hears me saying this shir might have an idea that the one who's saying the shir already achieved excellence in the subject. So it's certainly not the case. And although the formula usually should be kshoita atzmecha v'achar kach kshoita acherim, make yourself beautiful and then only then try to beautify others. I am learning with you. You're joining me on my personal mission to achieve this excellence together with you. The pasuk says that Eikev Anova Yiras Hashem. On the heels of humility will come Yiras Hashem. Person has to first feel humble in order to be able to try to seek out what he needs to take care of. That's the mission of Chometz, to see what is agitating him in his life. Where is his Yetzer Haras? Everybody has Yetzer Haras, but they are by each person in a different place. Some of them are in the way they speak to people. There are people that are not sensitive enough, and they say oinas devarim, hurtful words. Some people gossip without control and trample on lashon hara and rechilas. Other people, their shmiras einayim needs correction. Yet other people don't do things meaningfully, and they don't pray with thought. There are people that fritter away their time on foolishness and don't use it to learn Torah. There are people that don't help out at home. There are people that don't respect their parents. Everybody has to know where their Yetzer Hara is, but a person needs first to be in a position of humility in order to be ready to take a look. This is not an easy thing, because we're going against the grain. Ein adam roa nigei atzmai. A person doesn't see by nature their own flaws. Now, trying to be humble is walking in the footsteps of Hashem. The very Torah starts out, Bereshis bara Elikim es hashamayim v'es. So the obvious question is, why does it say Bereshis bara Elikim? It should say Elikim bara Bereshis. Start with Hashem. Bereshis bara Elikim lends itself to a very big mistake. Indeed, when they had the great miracle that the 70 sages were forced to translate the Torah into Greek, they all made the same changes. And one of the changes is they translated Bereshis bara Elikim as Elikim bara Bereshis. Because if you say Bereshis bara Elikim, it lends itself that Hashem took Bereshis, initial materials, building blocks, and He created the world, which is not true. Hashem created the world yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, the great miracle of ex nihilo, and that there were no building blocks. And therefore, it would have been better to say Elikim bara Bereshis. But it says Bereshis bara Elikim, says the Medrash, Kol makom she'ata motzei gedulasai, sham ata motzei anvisanusai. Wherever you find His greatness, there you find His humility. Hashem didn't want to start the Torah with His name. It lends itself, people make mistake. Tzadikim yelchu bay, or paishim yikashlu bay. We're not going to worry about the paishim. The reason why Hashem didn't start the Torah with His name is the first lesson of the Torah is humility. It's a very powerful thing. If you want to know how important humility is, you look at probably the most famous letter ever written in the history of mankind. Definitely the letter that's read more than any other letter, some people read it every day, is the Igeres HaRamban. The letter that the Ramban wrote to his children to discipline them. There are people, it's in back of the siddur, there are people that read this letter every day. The Ramban writes in the letter, and you gotta hear this. Midas ha'anava, she mida toiva mikol midas ha'adam. The midah of humility, which is the greatest character trait of all the traits of humanity. There's a lot of traits in humanity. There's a midah of being charitable. There's a midah of being tolerant. There's a midah of being with alacrity. There's a lot of midahs. He says the greatest midah of all the character traits is the midah of humility. Taisus Mitzvahs Chalitza, that's the 12th parak of Masechtas Yevamis, cites the pasuk, aforementioned pasuk, Ekev Anava Yiras Hashem, Malamed Sheshkulinei, that the midah of being a Yorei Hashem is equal to the midah of humility. Now, that's incredible. Because the whole world was created for Yiras Hashem. Ma Hashem alikecha shoyal me'imach kiyam liyira. It's considered the first of all knowledge. Reishis Chokma Yiras Hashem. Shlomo HaMelech says, Ma Hashem alikecha shoyal me'imach kiyam liyira. To Taisus to say that humility is equal to Yira is a stupendous statement. Moshe Rabbeinu, who had all traits, was only praised that he was humble. That was his praise. The Pele Yoetz, the great Sfardi Chacham, who went through all streams of, streams is the wrong word, he went through the Aleph Beis and explained all areas of life. When he comes to Anova, he quotes the Gemara in Arachim Tes Zayin Amid Beis, Anova Gedoyla Mikulam. That's pretty succinct. Humility is greater than everything. And he writes, V'hi Ava Torah, it's the great principle of Torah and Midas Taivas. Now we have another sefer, one of the pillars. The Musa movement was built upon 4 svarim. One of the 4 pillars of the Musa movement is a sefer called Orchos Tzadikim. You know, we talk about authors that try to remain incognito, so that it should be 100%, their learning should be lishma, not for any fame. It's very hard to publicize your svarim and remain incognito. You know, the Chazon Ish tried it, he didn't succeed. And he originally published it as the Chazon Ish. Ish was Avram Yeshaya, Berelitz. But he didn't succeed. Everybody, the whole world found out who the Chazon Ish. The Chavetz Chaim tried it. He used to go out, peddle his svarim. He didn't succeed. The whole world got to know the Chavetz Chaim. The Orchos Tzadikim succeeded. Till this day, we don't know. He's learned in all the yeshivas, all over the world. Hasidim, you go to Satmar over here, they have a shelf full of Orchos Tzadikim. Litvish yeshivas, everybody learns the Orchos Tzadikim. We don't know who he is. So the Orchos Tzadikim, all the way in the beginning of the Sefer, it shows how important it is, has a shar that's called Shar Anova, the gate of humility. So he writes, "The b'mida so anava magia l'kol tov." That through the trait of humility, a person will attain all good. Because it says in Mishlei, Gimel Lamed Dalet, that's the Chachma of Shlomo, wisest of all men, La'anovim yitein chen. To the humble, there is chen. And he says if a person finds favor in the eyes of Hashem, to get everything. And he says, the chen, mi sheyesh lechen, tzoyik v'nena miyad. Somebody that has favor cries out and he's answered immediately. Now we have to know that as we start our annual pursuit of Chometz, trying to purge it from everywhere we will use on Pesach, we have to know, although Chometz generally represents the Yetzer Hara, but it specifically represents the ugliness of pride. Because it says that the matzah looks at the Chometz and says, we have the same ingredients. We're both flour and water. Why are you so puffed up? That's why Chometz is the same letters as Tzomach, the sprout. And it's the same letters as Meitzach, like a brazen forehead, like a Meitzach Isha Zayna. Because the Chometz that we try to pursue and destroy represents this arrogance, which is the antithesis of humility. But here's the rub. Here's the challenge. And I have to tell you that it's hard to find a truly humble person. Because the people that are truly humble, we don't know about them. They're successful. And they're incognito. The truly humble person, listen to the words of the Peleyaitz. Ulefi shivcha v'toivasa, and according to its praise and its goodness, kasha mitziasa. It's hard to find it. It's hard to find. It's hard to find somebody that has it. So, I want to tell you what I believe is the great challenge of this trait. You see, what drives us? What motivates us? We're motivated. We're motivated to get accolades and praise and approval from people. That's what motivates us to do things. Furthermore, what also motivates us is to feel personal excellence, to stoke our ego, to feel accomplished. These drives fail miserably when we're pursuing humility. Because the very definition of humility is to feel lowly in the eyes of people. And to feel that we ourselves are unworthy, which goes directly in a crash course. The idea of anava is to be shafal be'enai atzmai and to run away from covet. It's a very big challenge. Very, 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 very big challenge. How do you do this? Rav Elimelech Biederman asks that Rashi tells us that in the procedure of the Paraduma, we have the Eitz Erez, we have the towering cedar, and the hyssop, and the red thread, which telas, which reminds us of a worm. So Rabbi Elimelech Biederman says, what do we need the hyssop for? We're saying if somebody is arrogant, so he should lower himself like hyssop. What do we need the cedar? If we are arrogant, we're already arrogant. We don't need the symbol of the cedar. We know we're a big cheese. We know we're top tomato. We're working on that. We're trying to make ourselves lower. Why do we need, as part of the ritual, the cedar? So he says that we can't make an error here. We can't make a mistake and suffer from low self-esteem. We can't also put ourselves in a matzav of atzvus. When we work on our lowliness, then we could become depressed. That's not... We have to know that there's greatness in us. So how do we do this? So in the Igeres HaRamban, he says, Al Keina Farish L'cha. Let me explain it to you. Eich tisnaig b'midas ha'anava l'leches b'tamid. What's the way to be humble? It's interesting. You know, it says, Chitzayniyos ma'oros es apnimius. When we practice things, it will generate our interior feelings. So he gives us a practice. He gives us a humble practice. He says, Kol dvarecha yiyu b'nachas. You should speak gently to everybody. That's the way a humble person acts. They don't speak with commanding tones. You should speak gently to everyone. V'reishcha kafuf. Don't feel that you're on top of people. Man, with a bent head, with a humble head, don't look down on people. Then he says, V'kol adam yiyeh gadol mimcha be'einecha. Everyone should be bigger than you in your eyes. How could that be? How could that be? You know more than the other person. You know you've accomplished more than the other person. So the Pele Yoetz says a real interesting mashal. He says the king gave two nobles money. He gave one very big noble 500 golden denarii. To me, gave to one noble 1,000 golden denarii. And he gave the second noble 1,000 silver denarii. The big noble the one that towered in the realm, paid up 500 golden denarii, which is a very big sum of money. The other one paid up 500 silver denarii. Which one of them owes more? Obviously, the one who still owes 500 golden denarii. He did much more, but he owes a lot more. And therefore, says the Peleiotes, and this is what the Ramban means, you might have done more, but you were also given a lot more. And therefore, you might not be bigger than the other person at all. The Ramban adds that the other person might sin b'shogeg while you sin b'mezid, and only you know that. Ay, but we have such a tightrope. Ooh, boy. Let's go back to what motivates us. This is, I'll tell you, this is a struggle she'ein kamay. Let's go back to what motivates us. On the one hand, it says, Im lomanata Torah harba, if you learn a lot of Torah, al talzik tova latzmacha. Don't consider yourself great. Kilakach natzarta. That's why you were created. So, how are we supposed to motivate ourselves? You know, it says in the Mishnah, let's think about it. It says in the Mishnah, Keser Shem Tov Oila Al Gabeyan, that a crown of a good name towers above all the crowns. So doesn't that mean that I should want to have the crown of a good name? That I should want people to think good about me? And what does Rebbe say? Rebbe says it's a beferish Mishnah. it's a beferish mitzvah. I'm a Rebbe. It's the beginning of the second parak of Pirkei Avos. Eizer derech sheyavel lo ha'adam. What's the path that a person should choose? Kol shi teferes lo yiseh. Whatever brings splendor from his creator. V'teferes lo min adam. And it brings teferes from people. So which one is it? Do I want to fashion for myself a crown? The crown of the good name? Do I want to do things that bring me teferes from people? Or do I want to be bereach min hakoved? And to think that I'm lowly? Boy, is this a tightrope. So I had a conversation when I was preparing this shir. You know, nothing is coincidental. And I always feel that the schus of the rabbim of this shir guides me in the right path. So I had a remarkable conversation with my younger brother, Rav Yisroel Weiss. He told me that he once asked Rav David Feinstein. David Feinstein, Zechat Tzadik L'Bracha, Schus Yagan Aleinu, was Rav Moshe's oldest son. He once asked Rav David Feinstein, how is it possible that Rav Moshe was smiling all the time? The whole day he was listening to people's tzaras. They called him up. They're 20 years without children. They're going through chemotherapy. Their heart is not working. They have a miserable marriage. He heard all of this suffering. How could he be smiling all the time? So Rav David looked at my brother with a big smile, and he said, I asked my father the same question. I asked my father the question. And my father told me, the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from Moshe Feinstein his avodah. How could I not be besimcha? That's what Rav Moshe said. Now you have to understand what that means. That means that we can be fueled with the ambition and the motivation to give nachas to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Hasidim say, La seis nachas ruach liyitzreinu. We can feel a tremendous satisfaction that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's a great motivation. As long as we're not doing it to aggrandize ourselves. That's not humility. There could be a motivation. How can I not be happy? The Rebbeinu Shalom wants Moshe Feinstein's avodah to be satisfied, and that's why the Hasidim, before they do a mitzvah, they say l'shem yichud, kudsha baruch hu shchintei, hini muchen, to be mekayim the mitzvah, and then what do they say afterwards? V'hinoyam Hashem Elokeinu aleinu. Let the sweetness of Hashem Elokeinu be upon us. I'm doing the will of Hashem. Oh, that's a motivation. And you know, as I was saying this, I realized that that's exactly what Hillel says in Pirkei Avos. In the first parak of Pirkei Avos, listen to what Hillel says. Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who's there going to be there for me? But but if I'm for myself, me'oni. What am I? This is exactly what he's talking about. We got to make a mensch out of ourselves. We got to do the Ratzon Hashem. If I'm not going to take care of myself, Mili who's going to take care of me. But if Shanila asks me if I'm doing it for myself, then me'oni. And as I thought of this, so I ran to the Svarim Shenk to take out the Pirkei Avos to see what the Mefarshim say. And oh, was I happy when I saw what the Tiferes Yisroel says. The Tiferes Yisroel Mamish says this. He says, Kishani la'atzmi ma'ani. If I'm not doing it leman ha'toiv, bavur shu toiv, because I want to do the right thing, and bavur ki ritzoin ha'boirei osisi, because I want to do the will of my Creator, rather rak lispor osisi, I just want to glorify myself. And then the kol ma'isai muluchlochim megayas. Then all what I do is muddied with arrogance. B'ameh nechshav ma'isai k'zais. That's not worth anything. I want to add something else. I had a ma'isa with Rav Moshe. One time, I told you there were 4 pillars of the Muslim movement. One of the other pillars is, of course, the most famous Sefer, the Mesilas Yesharim, written by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, which didn't receive its due during the lifetime of its author, but afterwards the Vilna Gaon said that until the chapter Prate Nikias, there isn't an extra word in the Sefer. So he starts off the Sefer by saying that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is to benefit from the Ziva Shchina, from the splendor of the Shchina in the next world. That's how he starts off, Yesoida. So I asked Ramosha, but we're supposed to serve Hashem, Shaloi al Manas L'Kabel Pras, not to get reward. I told you that Hashem gives us so much already, what are we asking for, a tip? So Ramosha told me, in our day, in the modern era, halavai, we should serve Hashem with perfect belief that we're going to get reward. So therefore, when we're looking for motivation, we could be motivated to give nachas to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and we could be motivated to get Olam Haba. Not to be motivated to make ourselves great. You have to know that the Ramban, in his letter, he wants to explode the myths of personal greatness. So he says, Bameh Yisga, what should a person be haughty about? In Ba'isha, that he amassed a lot of money. Hashem Ma'irishamash, that comes from Hashem. There's a Galgal Bailam, there's so many stories of riches to rags. People lose in Ponzi schemes. People lose their money overnight. And here's a scary thing. The Imbachachma, wisdom. Meiser Safal and Memanim. Hashem removes speech from word masters. People who are masters of the tongue and then get strokes. They can't string words together. V'tam zakenim yikach. We see Rahman al-Islam senility, Alzheimer's. So what is a person being haughty about? Ramila would say that one's humility is in direct proportion to his awareness of Hashem. And that's why Ha'ish Moshe on a ma'id mikalanam. Because Pel Adaber Bay, like Kam Novi Kamaisha, who saw Hashem Kaviyach upon him. So therefore, because he had the greatest awareness of Hashem, he therefore had the most significant sense of his own humility. When I talked about a person feeling great from doing the will of Hashem, so I found a treasure. I found a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, in Chronicles 2. One of the psukim that they said over and over again in Slabotka. In Slabotka, they would say a pasuk 100 times in sing-song way until it went into the very bones. So one of those psukim was Toyavas Hashem Kol Gevalev. It's an abomination of Hashem, one who is haughty. Yet, in Divrei Hayamim, speaking about a tzaddik that we don't know so well, that tzaddik was Yehoshaphat. It says that Yehoshaphat said about himself, Gava libay b'darchei Hashem. My heart swells in the ways of Hashem. You could swell that you're doing Hashem's will. That could give you immense satisfaction. That can drive us. But not that we're better than other people. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that the first Baba of the Rebbe, not Reb Shlomo Babov that we know from Borough Park, but his predecessor was also Reb Shlomo Babov. The first Baba of the Rebbe wrote a Sefer Ateres Shlomo. And he says the only carbon besides the 10 loaves of the Taida, but generally a carbon was never Chometz. Kos of or v'chol devash, leaven and honey were not allowed on the Mizbeach. But the shtei alechem, the 2 loaves, which accompanied the kifsei atzeres on Shavuos, were Chometz. Says the first Bava of the Rebbe, Zechatzav Kosher Brachas Chusu Yagan Aleinu, because that's the 2 loaves is Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. One could swell that they're fulfilling Hashem's mission. Hashem created the world for Torah. Right? It says that Hashem created this world, Bereishis bara Elokim, b'shvil Torah shel nikra reisos. And I believe that that's why the Ramban says in his Igeres, B'chol dvarecha, in all your words, u'masecha, in all your actions, u'machshavisecha, in all your thoughts, u'b'chol eis, chashoyev b'libcha, think in your heart, kilu ata oimel lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you're standing before Hashem, v'shknasei alecha, and Shechina is upon you. Now, you could say that this simply means what it says in the beginning of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch starts out, Shivisi Hashem l'negdi samet. Have Hashem before you at all time. And as he goes on to say, you're not going to behave the same way when you're sitting in your room than when the king is in front of you. But I believe he's saying more than that. He's talking, if we're going to be humble, then what's going to drive us? We need to have drives. If we're going to constantly feeling that we're lowly and that we're going to return to the dust and be a meal for the worms and the maggots, right? That's what it says. No, law not to highlight. Then what's going to drive us to accomplish? What's going to drive us to feel like the tall cedar? The answer is, have Hashem before you. And know that you're doing His will. And that will bring the sweetness. V'noyim Hashem Elokeinu aleinu. And that's good. Like Ramosha said. How can I not be happy? Hashem wants to avoid Moshe Feinstein. By the way, my brother told me that he asked this same question to Reb Ruvain. He asked Reb Ruvain, how could Reb Moshe be happy all the time hearing so much sorrow? Reb Ruvain gave him a totally different answer. They're both true. Reb Ruvain told him, you know, you and I know that it says, Kol mada ovid rachmanu l'tava. Whatever Hashem does is for the good. You and I know that. But my father felt it. So when someone came to him with a tzara, he cried with the person because Nebuch Yid is suffering. But when the person left, my father knew ultimately that everything is for the good. And he was able to go back to his learning. Of course, that's a very high madrega that simple people like me can't even begin to understand. But that was, of course, the Rash Bahag, the Rosh Kol B'nei Hagayla. Now, when we lay in Parshas Parah this Shabbos, when we lay in Parshas Parah, we should know that there's a power in the laming. You know, it says in the Parsha, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron, zois chukas atayra." This is a statute of the Torah. We know that a chayk is something that we can't understand. Like basa b'chalav, the meat is kosher, the milk is kosher. When you cook them together, they become very forbidden. We don't understand why. Shatnez is a chayk, is a statute. Paraduma is a statute. Shlomo HaMelech said, "Amarti ekama." I thought I would be wise. You take a cow and you burn it. It has to be a red cow, and that purifies us from contamination. It's a chayk, but it says, "Yidaber Hashem al Moshe vel Aaron zois chukas hatayva asher tziva Hashem lemar." Now, the word lemar is superfluous. Zois chukas hatayva is about to tell them, zois chukas hatayva asher tziva Hashem, obviously lemar. So the Koznitz Magid says that this reveals that the Torah knew that there would be many years that we wouldn't have a Beis HaMikdash, and that we wouldn't have the ashes of the red cow. And just the saying of the text of Parshas Chukas on Shabbos brings Tahara. That's why, although many say that women don't have to come to Shul for Parshas Parah, they say that the women don't need a kapara for the Chet HaEgel because they didn't sin in the Chet HaEgel, and they say it's mangrama, it's limited by time. But who wouldn't want to have the purifying dust of the laming of Parshas Parah? And you know, it's interesting, the Aruch HaShulchan writes that he finds a remez that this is effective just by listening to the words, because it says, "L'doroseichem chukas olam," for your generations an everlasting statute. And for your generations an everlasting statute. What does it mean, everlasting? It's not everlasting. We don't have a red cow now. We don't have the mechatas. We don't have the water of lustration. No, it's referring to these words. Come to Shul, and you hear the words of the Parsha of Paraduma. That in itself gives purification, which we're looking for. As the year ends, in order the year ends, and we're getting ready for our annual pursuit of the Yetzer Hara, we're looking for that prefatory purification. I want to thank our sponsors for this year. My dear supporters, Mr. Rabbi and Mrs. Yoel Klugman, for Yeshua for Klal Yisrael, how we need a Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. There's been so many vicious attacks from Hezbollah now. And by Aryeh for the Zivik Haven for Tzvi Moshe ben Davida in honor of the Masifta of Cincinnati and its Anahala. And we will continue with the Agudas next week. We're looking for a sponsor. We don't have even one sponsor. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Please continue to join us for our Daf Yomi, which Motzei Shabbos is at 9:30 at zoomdaf.com, and next week, Emir Hashem, at 7:55. And we want to wish you all a very wonderful good Shabbos.